Not so long ago, I was reading Eric Chester's book on fire at work. He talks about the 10-80-10 principle. I've also seen the 20-60-20 principle. As long as your math works out, this should still make sense. The point is that most leadership, most management is focusing on the top and the bottom. The top rock stars, producers, salespeople, and the bottom problems. The ones they're trying to, address all the time. The thing is there's this big chunk in the middle of people that get forgotten about because they're just going about doing their jobs. They're not the rock stars, they're not the problems, they just are to a lot of leaders. Employee journey mapping is an excellent tool to engage those kind of people because you're understanding where it all started, how it's progressing, and even learning when it ends, however it might end. I am super excited to talk about it today because I'm going to give you actually even a workbook to work through that will actually help your organization help everyone on their journey. Hold on. This is Relationships at Work, the Employee Experience and Workplace Culture podcast. I'm Russel Lolliker. I'm the host. So you'll be hearing my voice quite a bit throughout this episode, but not so much as our amazing guest. And I'm going to get into who that is very, very shortly. We had an amazing conversation. She dropped some really interesting nuggets on how to approach the... You know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. Stop right there. I want to first talk about our sponsor. Oh no, I don't have an actual sponsor. I just like to talk about things in this little space here to sort of put a spotlight, put an eyeball on something that you may not be as aware of or engaged with. So how about our Facebook community? That's right, we have a Facebook community where we discuss what burnout looks like, what psychological safety means to people, and articles that I've come across or community members have come across that can really help with leadership and employee experience or workplace culture. So I'd really love it if you join us too. Just go on over to Facebook and search for the group Relationships at Work. Same name as the podcast, real easy to find. And I really look forward to talking and learning from you over there. But now, if I had a drum roll button from my old radio days. Nope, nowhere to be found. Okay, so anyway, amazing guest today. I'm talking to Jeannie Walters. Jeannie is someone I've orbited for a long, long time, but never really had a deep conversation. I've learned so much from her, so to actually get her on the podcast to dig a little deeper for you, good stuff. Very good stuff. So without further ado, let's do over there with Jeannie Walters. Over there, I got Jeannie Walters, and here is why she's awesome. Okay, she is the CEO and founder of Experience Investigators, a global, that's a big part of the planet, customer experience consulting firm. She is a co-host with Adam Toporek on the Crack the Customer Code podcast. I'm still heavy breathing. I got a bit more to get to. A TEDx speaker on meaningful micro engagements, a Forbes Coaches Council member, a C-suite network advisor, and a LinkedIn learning instructor. If you haven't taken any of her courses on LinkedIn, fix that. Also, I should mention she has this all wrapped up in about 20 years of experience helping organizations, including in employee engagement, which is what this show is all about. So I am overly freaking thrilled to have Jeannie Walters here. Hi, Jeannie.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. How are you, Russ?
I'm good and way caffeinated for this early in the morning. So
I'm still working on it, so I'll catch up.
Perfect. People will be listening and you'll just see the crescendo of energy as we just ramp up throughout the show. So before we get into our topic today, I love asking this question because everybody, it's so personal asking this particular question for a lot of people. And I don't think organizations really realize the impacts they have on their employees, staff, leadership when they go about their day. So asking you the question, what is your worst or best employee experience?
Yeah, I've gotta go with the worst one here. And it was my first job out of college, and I was one of 3 kind of leaders in the location, and I was not having an affair with the boss out of the 3 of us. And so that was awkward, and eventually it became really tough. I was getting a lot of very inappropriate questions and all sorts of things. I was very young, and part of what happened was I kept getting "Oh gosh, we're gonna have to have you work on this weekend. We're gonna have to have you come in this weekend." And it got to a point where I worked 24 days straight and was in the office and making less than everybody and the whole thing. And I remember talking to my dad, who's always been a wonderful mentor, and I was sharing that, and he said, "Indentured servitude is over." And I've never forgotten that
I
because
love that.
it's so true. But one of the things that happened was I got transferred out of state. I came back after that team had left in a blaze of not glory.
Sure.
And when I came back, I had to drive back to that office, and I still remember driving back knowing those people were gone, and I felt sick physically just going back to that location. And I've never forgotten that because it showed kind of the trauma really that I had been feeling personally and how I felt like I was going back into the den, like
Yeah.
but the outcome of that, my next boss was an amazing mentor and friend. He still is. We had him as a reader in our wedding. Um so he really was incredible about helping me see like this had nothing to do with you. And I think that message was so important at that moment so that I could move on. So, yeah, not to get too deep or personal here, but that's my story.
That's pretty deep and pretty personal. It's the ramifications that people aren't stupid. Employees aren't dumb. They do know what's going on if the boss is, doing something,
Mhm.
something. They they pay attention. The problem is, and we're hoping this is the shift eventually, which is people realizing they don't have to put up with this. They don't
Right.
have to just be there and take it, which is such a I don't want to say it's a generational thing. That's not the point of the podcast, but it is interesting to the story,
Yeah.
which is the generational thing of at my age, we were kind of I'm the Gen X, right?
2.
Yep.
Mhm.
And ours is sort of that between boomers, which stayed at the same
Yep.
business for 20, 30 years, and we're lucky to have it, versus the millennials that are just looking at their clock going, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to be at this meeting. I want to
Mhm.
say, and I'll say something about it. And I'm looking at the boomers going, that's how I was raised, and looking at the millennials going, damn, I want to be brave enough to do that.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah. And
sort of in that middle.
I think the other thing was we had a definition of what professional looked like, and you had to fit into that box.
Oh, I still hear that bullshit of
And
that's not professional.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I always felt like I couldn't be my full self, and now I think we are learning that when you let people be their full selves, that's when magic happens. That's when they bring their best to you, and, that's when I think people feel most valued and appreciated and all of that. So that's one of the values of my company now is really humor and humanity is one of our values because I want people to be who they are and recognize each other as individual human beings.
So our talk today is about the journey of that employee. I was super excited to talk about this because there's so much Hmm. I'm just so curious about your perspective on this because there's so things missed and so many things not considered. We jump into the whole customer journey, and we were talking about this right before we started pressing record, which is customer equals money. So most organizations will go focus on the customer journey. Where's
Mhm.
the friction? How can we make this better? How can we ease this experience? Meanwhile, the employee, the one that's doing all the work to build that relationship, is like, what the fuck about me?
Right.
So we don't have those conversations enough. So maybe we
Mhm.
should start with what is an employee journey?
Mhm.
Maybe let's define it first.
Yeah, well, I think my lens is customer experience. And so what I started thinking about was that we need employees who actually deliver the customer experience, and that's the only way to be successful. And if you apply some of the best practices of customer experience to employee experience, it's magic, right? And so this is what when I think about the employee journey, I think about it as, you know what? It's really easy, just like it is everywhere else, to put people into boxes, into groups, into segments, and kind of assume that their journey is all the same. And what I like to think about is, if we know that, for instance, we know the journey starts before they start with you, right? And so if you don't have your values on your job descriptions, and then you get people who don't align with those values, that creates tension from the beginning. So, like, really looking at the journey from how do they find you and what are you actually projecting to them? What are you telling them about the role, the organization, the culture? And then all the way through, what is the candidate experience like? Even if you don't hire them, how do you close that loop so that they don't walk away and tell all of their friends it's a mess, don't apply there? And, what does onboarding look like? I've seen so many organizations who have beautiful 3-day, like, get everybody together. We're going to onboard the next class of whatever. They talk about all the big stuff, the vision, the values, all of that. And then employees never hear about those things again in their whole journey. And I think, tenure, how long have people been with you? How can you recognize when they are loyal, when they are actually really, sticking with you? And all the talk right now about, like, people exiting and getting these exit interviews, I think we should be talking to employees throughout their journey and checking in with them and saying, what would make your job easier? How could you be more effective and efficient? Where should we invest so that you can be? And, we actually have a journey mapping process for employees because you can use those same concepts and apply it to the employee journey.
I love that you talked about the customer experience, customer service tactics and phrasing that can be flipped with employees. I play a game with Nate Brown on Twitter. He will hate me. I think he hates me now. I love the man, but every time he tweets something really pithy or really smart about customers, I will retweet it, but take customer out and put employee in. And it's the exact same thing. Like, I think he's like humoring me, going, "Thanks, asshole. It's fine, fine." But if you look at it,
Yeah,
it's completely the same thing. If you listen to the voice of the customer, your organization will be more healthy. Wait, if you listen to the employee, your organization will be more healthy. I love that you're talking about the onboarding process as I picture it like this. It's like a helicarrier. People are flying in, they're given this beautiful helipad, enjoy the experience, and then as soon as they've landed, they push them into the water and go try to swim. Like, it's
yeah,
we'll get you there. We'll land you well. We'll tell you all the pithy, beautiful things, and then you're going to see the reality once you're in the organization. We got you, and
right,
now we're not going to care anymore.
right.
Values, oh, they're on a poster, but I don't
That's
actually.
right.
We don't know if we actually believe and grow with them. So you've kind of mentioned the beginning, and you kind of mentioned the end. But I want to look at it first before we get into more of the detail of the journey. What's the benefit of looking at it holistically?
hmm Yeah, great question. So I really think that if we're looking at an employee journey, if you think about, for instance, the story I shared in the beginning, right? Think about how crazy that journey was to get me from fresh out of college, first professional job, full of anticipation and excitement, but I'm on my own for the first time. I'm living in a new state, all of these things. Very little thought around that, right? Like, very little support around that or ideas of what can we do as an organization. So I felt very on my own. And then you get me to the point where I'm saying, well, my boss is still one of my very dear friends, mentor. Think about that journey. And when you look at the end to end, I think one of the things to consider is when there are bad things that happen, which there are, what can you do in that moment to make the holistic journey complete and better, right? So that they're not carrying that thing around. Because I think we've all seen this happen too, where sometimes it's like, "Oh, that person's not working in that department. Let's just move them across the hall to the other department so it's their problem," right? Like, and maybe that employee has a journey that we're not really recognizing. We're putting all of the blame, we're putting all of the accountability on one of you know, the employee instead of really looking holistically at, okay, what's going on here? What's the culture? What's the ecosystem? I mean, it kills me when I'm checking into a hotel and I see they're still using green screen computers in some of these places, and I'm like, "What is going on? How can you expect people to do their jobs effectively?" And I think that's that holistic idea of, instead of just saying like, well, sure, when somebody checks into the hotel, you've got to greet them warmly and get them checked in. Well, what does that actually mean? Like, get into the details of it. Because if you can look at the details, I mean, essentially they're touch points, right? So if we're looking at the touch points of the journey, when you look at it holistically, you start identifying where are those obstacles and challenges that we can fix, and where is there opportunity here, and how can we get that feedback from employees in the right moment so that we can make those changes to make their lives better, which ultimately makes the customers' lives better. So it all goes together.
What is a typical journey, though? I know we're generalizing here a bit, but typically, what would you say from beginning to end would be a typical employee journey? Just to give the listener an idea of the path they need to pay attention to.
Well, I think this is where best practices are really important. And one of them is you really have to think about, it's not going to be the same for everybody. So I do encourage you to think about a persona. For instance, one of the things that I find fascinating is that if I refer you to my company, you as a referred employee are more likely to be hired, more likely to stay longer, and more likely, this is the kicker, to make the company money faster, because we have a relationship and we have a trusted relationship. And I've said to you, Russ, I think you should apply for this job. It's a great place to work, all of these things. So when you look at, for instance, the referred employee journey, that's going to be slightly different than somebody who finds a posting on Indeed or Monster and applies through those channels, right? So when we talk about kind of a typical journey, it's really important to think about, who is this person and how did they find us? Now, the other thing I would say there, though, is the person who referred that candidate, we want to look at their journey too. What made them refer that employee? What was their journey like so that they feel so much trust and goodwill that they want to do that? That would be a great thing to journey map as well. So when I think about the employee journey, the beginning is really, really crucial. So you want to look at how they found you. You want to look at what was their candidate experience, how was that offer made, all of those things, and get feedback from them along the way and ask them, what was this like for you? Is there anything we could do to make this more comfortable or better? And then once they're in those different roles, like some organizations have really robust programs to help employees kind of go from team to team and really check things out and have that kind of 6 months of, let's just figure this all out. Other organizations, and I mean, I have a small company. Everybody wears a few different hats, right? And so looking at, what is that first 90 days like? What is that first 6 months? What is that first year? And then actually looking at, okay, we have people who have been here 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Let's go talk to them. Let's figure out what their journey was, because there's tons of opportunity to look at, how can we reinforce the values of our organization? And I think if we're not asking that question, we're missing a huge opportunity, because your employees will tell you, oh, yeah, I know we talk about work-life balance, but you have me working 80 hours a week. So I don't think we're living that value. How can we live that value more? And sometimes the answer is, you know what, we can't right now, but let's talk about how we will in the future. I'm not really answering your question because I feel like there's so much around this that isn't typical, but I would look at the beginning very carefully. I would look at the first 90 days, first 6 months to a year. And then I would also think about those different kind of personas. How do people find you? How are they starting their journey? And sometimes it's really good to narrow the scope and say, hey, person who's been here 10 years, let's talk about the last 2 years with our organization and figure out, you've been here 8 years. Why did you stay for this long? And then start there and figure out, what are they missing? Because they probably have a ton of wisdom that they can share too. So that's how I would approach it. But I think there are lots of different ways to slice and dice it. So sorry, I'm
Absolutely.
not being typical.
No, I never want you to be typical. So I like that there's a lot of heavy influence on the beginning of the journey because that is setting the foundation to, I guess, launch into the organization in success. But there are the end of the journey is also something I think that does not get enough attention. Certainly as we go along, there's maybe every year there's a survey, sort of a check-in of how are we doing for you, how are you feeling supported, but then we get towards the I'm leaving. And you could leave for retirement reasons, you could leave for you hate your boss, there's lots of reasons, but it still isn't treated as a part of the journey of people. It's just sort of like, oh, it's over, it's done, we don't have to care about this person anymore.
Yeah.
What would you say to that?
Oh boy. So one thing I would say is, just like any journey map, one of the things that I think we have to be aware of is that any phase of the journey, you have to remember there's an exit chute right at the bottom, right? Like any phase, they can leave you. So consider that because what would make them leave you in that phase and what is actually happening to the people who are leaving you. The other thing is, you know, we are in a world where we need employees. Like people are everywhere you go, there are help wanted signs up, right? We need help. So having people who worked for you refer other people is a really important thing. And I think that's one of the ways, I mean, to kind of flip that story that I told, one of the things that I judge myself on is if people work for me and then move on, do they still contact me? And I have people who still I have a phone call today with somebody I worked with 10 years ago who reached out and said, I just need a mentor about something and I wanted to talk to you about that. That's how I judge myself in that role because I know that, you know what? We want people who talk very well about working at our organization. So those referrals are super, super important because I don't know if you've ever I mean, I've been talked out of things by people who either say, don't use that recruiter, don't do this, whatever, because that's how, if they were treated poorly, that word gets around. So I think that's a huge part of it. And I also think that, some of those annual surveys are painful for the employees. And if they say anything, they're literally punished by I mean, one of my clients, they were a Fortune 50 company and they used to do an annual survey. And if the department got less than a 5 or something on cumulative, they had to have these meetings. And everybody hated the meetings. And the boss that was being evaluated didn't really get it. And so he thought it was just a matter of explaining why they did things. So then the next year when the survey came out, everybody's like, "Let just they were I heard them walk around, just give it a 5. We can't have those meetings." So we have to be really careful with that too. Like what is the outcome of closing the loop on those surveys and are we giving more than just one opportunity a year to share feedback? And what are we doing with it?
I use this as a barometer, and it blows people's minds because it's so forgotten about around surveys and psychological safety. A big canary in a coal mine is if your surveys are only anonymous, you have a problem with your culture. Your culture's broken. They're only feel safety if nobody knows it's them. That's a big problem in your organization if that's a thing.
I mean, as human beings, I think one of the things we all need and crave is simply to feel heard. And if we feel heard, that makes everything else a little better. There are going to be times that as employees, we have suggestions, we have ideas, and somebody says, we heard you. This is why we can't do that. That's okay, right? Like people respect that authenticity. I think the challenge is we position those surveys, we position those awful meetings in a way that basically people just think, well, I'm not heard. That's what drives people away. Absolutely.
Going back to the journey of, but using personas, very familiar with using them with customers. Not very frequently are they used for the employees. So I don't see it being too much different, but what are some of the ingredients of an employee persona?
Sure. Well, personas are interesting. I'm evolving a little bit with the use of personas in general because there are some, I think, demographic things that are important, but I think a lot of personas just focus on that, and there's a lot of assumption around that. And so one of the things that I started doing in my workshops and everything was instead of having a name on the persona, we use initials. And that's because we don't want people to immediately think, oh, so it's a guy or, oh, it's this type of person. Because I think that we are in this world, this amazing world, right? Where people are evolving, people are having more opportunities, like certain groups are getting more opportunities. There are all sorts of things happening. And when we looked at, when the world shut down, guess what? Baby boomers figured out digital pretty quickly. And there was lots of talk before that of we can't do that because our, employees are boomers. We figured that out. And I think part of what I look at is if we want a persona, you have to think about the scenario. Like, what are you actually mapping? So look at, which part of the journey maybe, or how much tenure, whatever. And then think about what is their real life. And that's what I try to get at with personas is let's just account for their real life. And so for instance, one of the employee journeys that we talked about recently was now that some people are going back to the office, a lot of people aren't. What does that journey look like? How do you help people make the right choice for them? And then how do you support that? And so how do you get the right technology into employees' homes? Well, it's a big difference if they're, a single person living in a tiny apartment in Manhattan versus somebody who's living in one of the far-flung suburbs here in Chicago in a house with 4 kids. And so you have to think about that. And so that's how I build personas is really thinking about what's most important to know about this person so that we can provide them the right support. Like what do we need to know? And if you think about that, that can guide you through, really figuring out what are the demographics that are important. What is the experience with the company that's important? What is the next role that they might have? So that you're looking ahead and not boxing them in that way too.
Yeah, I'm thinking all the psychographics you can throw in there as well to get a little
Mhm.
bit more. I was just thinking, even I did an episode with a gentleman named Will Mahone, and he was talking about how um, defining your employees' motivation, and he
Oh,
broke it into
yes.
7 different types of motivation. And by understanding their particular type of motivation, which I think would be perfect within a persona,
Yes.
would help you better motivate them at work because we are not all motivated. I don't care what your values are; we are
No,
all motivated by different things.
absolutely.
So there's a hugely beneficial ingredients to that.
Absolutely.
So whose job is it to map employees in an organization?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? um, so I am encouraged right now by what's happening kind of in human resources in general, because I think what's happening is people are starting to realize, just like with so many other kind of, customer experience or even marketing or places like that, you can't have the one person do it all. You can't have somebody who says, you know what, I am really good at surveys and designing and data and I'm really good at the culture and I'm really good at, change management and all those things. So I think what I look at is who is best suited for that kind of within that HR learning and development place. But just like everything else, it has to come from the top too, because, I was sharing with you how I work with a customer service team and I asked each one of them, would you refer somebody to this role? And they all said no. And part of why they said no was because, well, we keep hearing about how customer service is a cost center, and that was coming straight from the top. And so I think while you need somebody who understands how to map it and things like that, maybe from that HR learning and development team, the words and the message, it has to come from the top because just like you mentioned, your employees see stuff. We know what's going on. And so that's a big part of it. So you need that support, I think, from the C-suite.
So you've mapped out a few, personas, and before we went on as well, you were very generous to say you'll offer a link to a template for how to
Yes.
do an employee journey map. So thank you so
We
much
have a
for
whole
that.
workbook that's, yeah,
Beautiful.
available. Yep.
So I will put a link to that in the show notes on relationshipsatwork.ca. So please
Great.
check that out. The question I have though is you've done this, you've been through the process. Your HR department has done 5, 10, because please don't think it's just one or two people. Please
Right.
don't think it's just one or two journeys. There are a lot. When do you reevaluate these?
So I have a slightly different approach here because I think that as much as we want to say, let's get the end to end journey and figure it out, and then we've got it figured out, I really think that we have to look at specific kind of sections or scopes differently. And so, for example, if you have something change, if you introduce new technology or tools, that is a great time to reevaluate the employee journey. What does that look like? How does that impact them? And in fact, it's great to do right before you roll it out because then it will help you avoid some of the hiccups, right? One of my favorite examples is where they didn't consider the employee was a very large retailer rolled out a payment system on an app. They never told the cashiers about it. They never figured out what does this journey look like for the cashiers. So what happened was people would roll up their cart and say, "No, I paid for it." And hold up their phone and the cashiers were like, how do we know? What do we do? So that's what can happen if you don't consider the employee journey while you're kind of rolling out new things. So rolling out new things, technology tools, how many reorgs are out there, right? Like anytime you have a reorg, I think it's a great time to look at the journey again. And sometimes that doesn't mean the whole journey, right? Sometimes it means, okay, we know that this is going to impact this level in our organization and it's going to impact them in the following ways. Let's just look at that part of the journey. It's totally fine to do that. I mean, the speed of business is insane, right? Like a lot happens in 12 months. And so I think if we just say like, well, just do this every few years, you're going to miss so much. So I really encourage you, one of the things I say a lot is journey mapping is a verb, not a noun. It's not really about the map. It's about the process. And so the more that you can incorporate the activity of it, then you'll start getting the outcomes that you're looking for. Because otherwise you have a nice poster and that doesn't really do anything for anybody.
Where does employee journey mapping fall down?
Oh, um, well, you brought it. One of them up is the exit, is really not paying attention to the exit, assuming that people are just going to be with you. I joke about this a lot, but whenever I talk about customer experience or employee experience to like a group, there's always somebody who comes up to me and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you said this because I get it. It's just that everybody else in my organization doesn't." And so I think part of where it falls down is we assume that we know this stuff. We assume that it's common sense. We assume that our internal process maps and our internal documentation is actually reflective of the real world, and it's often not. And so I think that's where I see it fall down a lot. The other thing is we only focus. I mean, this is the same for customer experience too. People are like acquisition, acquisition. How do we get the employees? How do we get the employees? And we focus so much on that part that we ignore the people who are giving us signals that they're about to leave us because we haven't paid attention to that. And so one of the things that I like to talk about too is that when you're looking at like where should we start with this journey? If you know, for instance, wow, we've noticed that after a year and a half, we have a lot of people leaving. What's that about? What I would do is look at the last several people who have left and say what were the signals Let's map out their experience from 6 months before they left to when they left and figure out what are those signals we should be looking for as employers. And so I think there are lots of different ways to do that, but it falls down because we assume so much. We assume we know what people are going through. We assume our processes work. Um, Another example of this, I took a bunch of things back to a clothing store to return, and they had to call the manager up. The manager then, and this was after the Christmas holidays. So, like, there were a lot of people making returns. He literally, because we ordered them online, but I was returning to the store, which they said I could do, he literally had to call and report in every single SKU number in order to get the right price because they had different pricing in their systems. And I asked him about it and I said, "You have to do that for every return?" And he said, "Yeah, we've told our regional manager. We've told," like, he knew, he's the manager of the store. He's spending a half hour doing this for every single return. That's not a great use of time. That's an expense. He was trying to tell people that. And so if we look for those things of how can we ask the questions, how can we make this more efficient for you? What are your ideas? They will tell you. They've got great ideas. We just have to ask them.
So you've mentioned retention and how journey
Mhm.
mapping can certainly help with that. As a tool, an employee journey map, how can it help employee engagement?
Mm. Oh, I love this question. Yeah, just like anything else, I think if you are including people with their true kind of voice and saying you matter, that's a huge way to engage people. And whenever you're working on journey mapping, you have to include the people who are part of the journey, right? So having workshops with them, I've done things where I did a ride along with HVAC repair guys because they were saying, well, the assumption inside the organization was, well, they've got all these steps and it should be working out because we were told that this would increase our customer satisfaction. And when I talked to the guys, they were like, those steps make no sense at all. And well, I've tried it and it doesn't work. And they want me to execute, X number of visits per day. And those steps add all this time and it doesn't make a difference to the outcome. Just letting them vent to me honestly made it, like, one of them said, I was about to leave. And he's like, I'm so glad they brought you, to see this because we've all been saying things and nobody's listening. And I think that's value. That's how you engage people, is saying, we want to hear from you. We respect your ideas. And this is, how we're going to actually act on it. People will be more engaged if that happens.
I can't tell you how much employee journey mapping needs to happen in organizations. However, very few people are doing it. Why? What is the resistance to doing this?
Well, I think you mentioned part of it is who owns it. It's really hard. It's hard to figure out, who can take this on, who can really run with it. I think that's a big challenge in an organization. And there are so many different I don't know if goals is the right word, or if you look at how organizations are set up, I often say they're like, sometimes the journey map they assume is journey map by org chart. And so they think, you know what, if I'm doing my role in learning and development well, and we're moving people through the process in the way that I think, it must be working because I'm getting rewarded, right? As a leader, I'm getting rewarded for the outcomes that we're getting. But it's still very siloed. It's still very departmentally focused. And so we need to, just like everything else, we need to make sure that people understand, like, your part of the journey is a part of the journey. We need to reward everybody. We need to make sure we're including everybody so that we do look at this holistically. We understand that, in those onboarding sessions, we're setting expectations that they will be either happy with or disappointed about in 6 months, 12 months, 10 years down the line. That's how important those expectations are. And so really tying things together in that holistic way, it's hard. And I think that's a big part of it is we do not ask people to look at the employee journey in that holistic way right now. We really talk about it as if, again, acquisition, 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 and then we curse the people who leave. That's about it.
And I know you're a big supporter of this idea, is that trust is lost between words said and actions
Ugh,
taken. So
yes.
why not look at it as your onboarding process is the words said and actions taken is the journey along the way. So of course people are leaving because remember all those really nice things you said at the beginning? Well, you haven't delivered on any of them as we've progressed. So of
Right.
course they're going to leave. They don't trust you to do what you say you're going to do
Right.
with an organization. That's just with customers, people. This is an employee problem.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that I'm seeing is that we are, sometimes we over focus on efficiency and we don't include the people in that. And I think when we are looking at the employee journey, it's really important to let the employees know that they are first. And in order to deliver on that, you need to show up like that. And that means, instead of saying we need more production, asking the employees, what's in your way? How can we help you? How can we make sure that we can remove some of those obstacles and challenges? And I mean, the star employees always have workarounds. And if you can figure out what are those workarounds about, then you can start really chipping away at the stuff that matters in the employee journey because they will figure out a way to do it. But if they have workarounds, that's a problem.
Jeannie, I got to ask you the final question of the podcast. Love having you on. Thank you so much. This has been a great
Thank you.
conversation.
This is fun.
So, last question. What is one simple thing that people can do right now to improve their relationships at work?
I would say bring your authentic self. And just if that's not enough, then that gives you something too. But I think if we all bring our authentic selves, magic happens.
And let's hope you work at a culture that allows you to do that.
Yes. You're here. Yes.
Thank you so much again, Jeannie. As I've mentioned in the podcast, Jeannie's been very generous to offer her workbook on the employee journey mapping. Yeah, I'm going to go actually download it right after we get off this podcast. So thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to... I've known you for years, and we've never been ever had a conversation like this. So I'm just like giddy. I'm like, I'm like, this actually happened. I'm so
I know your Twitter avatar speaks.
Yes, exactly. I'm just a postage stamp to you. That's all I am.
This is great, Russ. Thank you for what you're doing. This is really important.
Thanks, Jeannie. Thanks again for joining the podcast Relationships at Work, the Employee Experience and Workplace Culture podcast. Quick little reminder, as I said off the top, we'd love it if you join our Facebook community. Just go over to the Facebook. Nobody knows what they're talking about on social media if they put the in front of it. Not the case here, I promise. Anyway, head on over to Facebook, search for the group Relationships at Work, and I look forward to meeting you. I look forward to talking to you, and I look forward to learning from you. You have a great day. Take care.